So, good afternoon, everybody. I'm really glad that you joined me. This is going to be the first of a couple of webinars that we'll be holding during the course of the Technovation curriculum. And I had been receiving some feedback from some of you folks that your teams had begun and some of them had started working on solutions to their problems. And I just wanted to kind of get you guys thinking about how you could bring them back into the conversation about identifying the problem first, because that's pretty important before they continue carrying on. And so today we're going to be talking about this ideation process. And this is very early on in the Technovation curriculum. It's a really exciting part of things, and it's where students get to exhibit their passions for whichever problems they're solving. So what we're going to do today in our overview is talk a little bit about where that fits in the curriculum, talk a little bit about the engineering design process and what ideation is, and then what you'll see is we're going to dig deeper into the problem that the team wants to solve, talk about who that user is and what their needs are. If any of you are familiar with design thinking, none of this will seem strange to you. If some of you are new to design thinking, then I'm excited to share this with you because it really focuses on what people's needs are and why the girls are working on these apps in the first place to help solve serious problems in their communities. And after that, we'll talk about how you can get into the process of, once they've identified their problem, designing and prototyping some solutions really roughly on a piece of paper. We're not talking about anything like 3D printing or anything that needs software. This is all paper and pen sort of thing and human interaction, just talking. And then we're going to talk about how you can get the conversation going with the students so they can communicate their ideas. And then most importantly, give each other time to ask questions to themselves, to their communities about the prototype, and then refine these ideas. So with that in mind, we're going to go ahead. Do we have any questions as of now in the chat about what this webinar is about and what we're going to be focusing on? So I have here a video. I'm going to be walking you through this. So what we're talking about today is a workshop that you might lead with your team as a coach or mentor when you're having a meeting and talking about these initial stages. And so everything we're talking about here are materials that I've kind of collected for you guys in this presentation, which is available in the materials part of your panel. And right now we're in the presentation. And so I'm just going to walk you through some of these materials. We're not going to listen to this clip of the Code Girl video right now because you've all seen it if you've taken part in training. It's about a 2-minute overview that you can show your students. And that's what my screen is resting on right now. And it talks about problem solving, the importance of communicating the ideas, and what it takes to get the students up and running in the program and starting off on the right foot, which is what we're going to be talking about today. So this is a clip of a video that you can use from Code Girl that just came out by Leslie Chilcott, who did Waiting for Superman and The Inconvenient Truth. It's a really exciting video, which is available to either rent or see. I'm going to put or you can find that in the chat room right now. It's called codegirlmovie.com. So I'm pretty sure you guys, your names all look really familiar to me, so we've probably gone through this, so I won't get into that too much more. But it's always nice to start off a session with a kind of minds-on activity. So maybe showing them a video clip or getting them in the mood for what you're about to discuss that day. And so I really recommend this clip for you guys. It's only like 2 minutes long, and I think it's fun to kick off an important topic like ideation with the girls by having a minds-on activity like that. So this could be part of a conversation you're still having with them about what the program is. And I think giving them the full picture of what they're doing in the bigger scheme of things is really helpful when having these early discussions. So there's a slide here that you might also recognize from training, but it focuses on ideation. So letting them know that, yes, they are going to be creating an app to solve the problem. first begins with ideation, and that's why there's an arrow right here. So identifying a problem in their community. You guys might think, or they might think, oh, hey, no problem. Identifying a problem is easy peasy. We're just going to skip right into the technology solution. But I'm going to argue here that you should argue with them, like, no, I think we need to sit and talk about this problem actually, because a lot of things are going to go into this app and inform the creation of the app based on what the problem is that they're all looking at. So how that relates to the rest of it is later on they will be developing a technology using App Inventor in many cases, or Swift or Java or whatever language they really want to learn and feel comfortable doing. And then that will also feed into the entrepreneur side of things, so building the overall business plan. So knowing their user and making a compelling argument about what the problem is and why they want to solve it in this way is so important. And so really going over this ideation with them at the beginning is so important. And then also finally, the whole thing that they're building up to is really creating the pitch and having other people absorb their ideas, people who could actually give them the funding they need to make their app viable. So that is the whole picture sort of thing. When we're talking about Technovation, a lot of this program really focuses on the engineering design process. The girls might not realize that they're participating in this process, and it's okay to just do it without talking so much about the metaphysics of what they're doing in the beginning. Sometimes girls hear the word engineering and they might not find that to be so sexy. You can also refer to it as a design process. But what we're going to be doing today and talking about with them is, well, what is this process? How do we get started? You could be in one of two boats right now. You could just be starting, and your students might be saying, well, I just don't know where to begin. You might be feeling the same way. Or they could have already jumped ahead to step 3, which is make a model here and test it. So what we want to do is bring them back to where my mouse is, to defining the problem. And they might need to come back to this at many different points, actually. So that's kind of interesting. And I like having a graphic visual whenever you need to bring up the conversation again, like, hey, I think we need to start, hey, do you guys think that we need to go back and talk about what the problem is? So especially with middle schoolers, we've been doing a lot of Girls Make Apps workshops lately. And middle schoolers are like, yes, I know the perfect solution. We're just going to do this. And sometimes they have really broad ideas, like, they're really interested in figuring out a solution to an environmental issue. To give you guys an example, last weekend we were delivering a Girls Make Apps workshop where we talked a little bit about App Inventor, and then we got into the problem solving bit. And some of the girls wanted to solve the problem of the drought, to give you an example. If you're in that boat, you're not alone. A lot of middle school students will say, I'm really interested in the environment. And then you have to help bring them into a conversation about, well, what part of this problem are you actually going to try and solve? Because this is a big problem, a big issue, and you're going to want to narrow it down with them. So we'll talk about tactics on how to do that and specific exercises that I used during this workshop that seemed to work pretty well. And we did get the group to sort of zone in on the kind of problems they wanted to be solving, which I'll get into. Any questions about the engineering design process? Are any of you science teachers? And do you notice any similarities between the engineering design process and the scientific process? A lot of this discussion is going on in the United States right now, at any rate, with the next gen science standards and the Common Core, and focusing on process and not necessarily, trying to create something perfect and having a great end result, but having students think about the process that they're in. So I'm hoping that this won't sound totally unfamiliar to you guys, and that you can actually use a graphic like this to help with conversation at times. So if you also look in the materials section of the control panel for you guys, I included a flow. So the flow is what I would be using during my workshop, say, to let me know at what time in the workshop I'm going to be doing certain activities. So if you open that up, you'll see that it started at 1 p.m. So hopefully you can use your imagination here, but I didn't spend too long with the introduction. Right now in the flow, you'll see that, we jump right into brainstorming and this individual activity, which we would be doing for like 20, maybe 25 minutes, depending on how big the team is. And the way to get them started, if they don't have a consensus on what the issue is they want to solve, is brainstorming problems. And since sometimes it's hard to get the conversation going, especially if they're tired after school or whatever, I give them all just stickies and I prompt them by saying, can you identify a problem in your community that you would like to solve? And I say, write one per sticky. And usually that gets them going pretty fast and they're thinking. And I also put some bullet points for conversation in case they're having a hard time thinking about what they want to solve. So it could be things they see near their homes or their schools. It could be an issue at school that could be improved or at home. And there are some interesting examples from last weekend. What about things you see or do every day? How about something in the news? So some of the teams acted on each of those prompts, and one of the interesting one was there was a problem at the school of seagulls, and the seagull poop, and just getting in the way of everything. And the school had not found some adequate solution, but they knew the school was working on solving that problem. So the girls wanted to create an app that helps feed the the seagulls better, manage them better, and raise awareness, and maybe even make a loud sound with use a sensor from a phone to find out when a seagull is around and make a noise. So that was one example of a problem that they identified. Another was drought. So in this stage of things, you could be seeing really broad kind of problems or really kind of smaller problems that are very unique. And that's okay. So I let them do this for about 10, 15 minutes. And then if there's a smaller group, if you're working your teams, I have them all stand up because I don't like to have them sitting down all the time. And we all go up to the wall, and I ask them to put their stickies up. And then we'll study the stickies and we'll see, are there any trends? Is there any commonality in what you guys are writing? If some of them write drought and another person writes, helping animals in the drought, I'll say, do you guys notice anything do you notice any trends? Okay, what's different about what this person put up on the wall? And we kind of sit there and observe it like it's an exhibit. And we talk about what their ideas are and how they might kind of work with other people's ideas to focus on a different part of the problem. Have any of you guys ever worked with student groups this way for brainstorming? It's pretty fun. After that part is done, I then bring them together as a team and we talk about what, having looked at these things that they put up and the trends, narrowing down on an idea that they actually want to solve. And this might take longer than the initial brainstorming process because this is where consensus building occurs. Sometimes you'll have a team that will have consensus immediately, and that's great. Sometimes you'll have a team where the consensus takes a while to build, and they might not agree in that one session. And that's okay. Realize that this part of the problem-solving process and Technovation might take you a little bit longer than some of the other units. And give yourselves time to actually allow students to mull over these issues and come back. Sometimes they need to think a little bit about these things. I have had a lot of success having, building consensus during the times where I meet with students. So I think it depends on your comfort level and how long the session is meeting. There's a few factors that can go into this consensus. And then once they all decide on what that problem is they're going to zone in on, I have them each fill out stickies, define why it is a problem. And this is really interesting because you're going to see that they have unique ideas about how to approach this problem. And then see if any of them have a story about it. Um, Ask if there's any stories in the news, whether there's any stories in their lives. Why are they passionate about it? And let them know why you're asking for this. Because in the end, it really all, they have to articulate their passion for why it's a problem when they're doing their pitches in the end. And so if they're passionate in the beginning about the problem and they have some personal connection to the problem, chances are they're still going to be very passionate at the end when they're submitting their deliverables. So this part is really kind of chunky. Sometimes I give them about 20 minutes to do this part. And then again, we all go up to the wall and we put the stickies on the wall and we talk about how the problem can be broken down into smaller bits and who is affected by that problem. So having them think about the user already and what the user's needs might be. This is a really key part of the whole process. And I hope that you guys can spend a little time with them on this. Not luxuriously, but give it the time it needs. And if you need 2 sessions to get consensus, that's okay too. It's totally fine. So another thing I like to do is talk about what a prototype is, because now that they've gone through some ideation and thinking about what the problem is they want to solve, the next thing that they're going to be doing is creating a paper prototype. So I also have in the materials section a paper prototype kind of worksheet that you can use with their students. All it really is a screenshot of a blank kind of smartphone screen. So you can use that with them. But before you do that, it might be worth having a conversation of, well, what is a prototype? And you can ask them point blank, hey, does anyone here know what a prototype is? Have you ever worked with one? And usually students are pretty savvy about that because they know that they've been, it's kind of like a rough draft of something they're working on. And that's also a way you can describe it. Another way you can have this conversation is by showing them a prototype. So I got this one at the Computer History Museum where I used to work. And it was a really great example from the early 90s. The problem they were trying to solve was that people had PCs, but they didn't have any way to sync up other devices like calendars and stuff. So Jeff Hawkins, who is the designer for PalmPilot, made this pocket-sized cardboard thing that you see. Can anybody in the chat room write any of the features of this? What is the stylus made out of, do you think? I love this prototype so much. It fits in your palm. It's got a sticker on the front. I shared this one with you guys because it has a sticker of a screenshot, and that's what's going to be really important for the next stage of the process. So he was the stylus, no one's guessed, is a chopstick. And another point you can make with them is that prototypes don't have to be fancy at all. Sometimes companies come up with prototypes that are 3D prints. Sometimes they come up with really expensive prototypes. But for this purpose, they only have to work with paper. And you can show them this. And then after we talk about that and we laugh, Jeff Hawkins actually took this prototype with him to work. He stuck it in his shirt pocket and he'd take it out at meetings and use it as though it was a real thing, and he tested it out. So testing is also really important. If you look at the image to the right, it's the ad for the PalmPilot. Does the prototype look to you like what the finished product looks like? You can just use the chat or pipe in however you want. So I'm seeing a lot of similarities actually between this prototype and the prototype. Yeah, very similar. Yeah, so In some cases, the prototype will not look as much like what the finished product is. And that's another point you can make with the students. I have a really good video that I'll share with you guys after that I did not include in this presentation about how Google X, which is the top secret branch of Google working on moonshot projects, what their feelings are about prototyping and giving themselves the opportunity to fail fast and fail hard so that they learn and they can get feedback from things they're developing and improve their products essentially. So the point here being a prototype does not have to be pretty or perfect, and you should give them wiggle room and they should give themselves wiggle room to create a product that, changes over time and adapts. So this is the point in the workshop. So we would be at the discussion if you have the materials out. That would have been about half an hour, and we're talking about prototyping. And then I ask them, hey, what are some of your favorite apps? And I have them take out their phones and show me and talk about it as a large group. And a lot of them like similar things like games or whatever. So there will always usually be something that they can all talk about. And you can talk about what your favorite app is and show them and talk about, well, what is the purpose of this app? What are some of the features? Who uses them? And most importantly, why? What are some of the features? Later on, they're going to be creating, using App Inventor probably to create features for their apps. So I think it's really important to lay this groundwork now and talk about what features are important and why. And also, if your app is simple, that's a great time to talk about how simple it is. There's some design features that are really, some principles of design that you can also talk about simplicity. You can show them some of your favorite designs that aren't even apps. Like if you have a favorite alarm clock or any device you use in your daily life that just has a great design, bring it in that day. Anything they can touch and look at, I assure you they'll remember because that's like physical learning. So bringing in an object and studying it is really important too. And talking about why this device is so great, is it something we didn't even realize we had to have because the design is so user friendly. So I think that's a really fun part of the discussion. Are any of you designers? I would love to have a designer in my coach group or as a mentor because I think human computer interaction is such an interesting field and it's always a really fun conversation. So mockups. This is the part where we put pen to paper with a group, and if you look at the flow, you'll see that prototyping and the activity there comes in around 40 minutes after you've been sitting with your group. So you can print out that worksheet that I shared with you. And you can say, okay, now's the part of the workshop or our meeting where we're going to actually put some pen to paper and we're going to think about an image that represents the problem. So if you look at any app, you'll usually notice that they have a starting page that's pretty simple or has an image of something that clearly identifies their product. It could be a logo, it could be a picture, anything like that, something that draws the user in and gives them some emotional attachment to what they're looking at. So one thing I love to do, and middle schoolers especially will do this really fast. High schoolers, some are really good artists too. If you give them the assignment to draw an image that represents the problem that they've picked, they'll usually come up with something pretty fast and maybe a name for their company or their app, or they can use their team name. And then, take out those stickies and say, well, who's your user? Come up with a profile for this user. Have them, write some of the details of who a user might be. So if we're talking about an app like Angry Birds, the user could be anybody, like anyone who likes to play games, anyone who's good at physics, anyone who likes to annihilate birds, stuff like that, or pigs. in a real life situation, say we were talking about animals during a drought. So this middle school team identified everybody in California, first of all, as the people who were affected by the drought. Then we narrowed them down to different users. So they picked animals who were stuck in a drought, which was kind of neat because I've seen a lot of students working with a drought theme, but I never saw a team kind of zoning in on the animals. And then so they answered the second bullet point, who is the user? They drew an image of an animal that was affected by the drought. Um, and then after they do a few of those things, and you could say that that's the start screen, start thinking about other screens for the app. You know, what features would it have? How would people navigate from one screen to another? You can print out as many of the prototype worksheets as you need and just let them get messy. If they want to, they can just draw on paper, get some butcher paper, have them think about how many screens they would need. And then after that, I don't have a very cool picture for this, but it's really important that they talk about their ideas and learn to get in the habit of talking outrightly about them and encouraging feedback from other people. This is a really fun part, and at the workshop that we did last weekend, teams were kind of trying to express their ideas first. They all wanted to express their ideas. They were really proud of everything they had done in the past hour, and they actually came really far in 1 hour. So by that point, you can expect that they have an idea, the problem that they want to solve. They've zoned in on a few special interest groups within that problem. They might have an image or a name, logo for their app, and they're already thinking about some of the special features. So in just a quick amount of time, you can actually elicit a lot of work from them, and you get them off their chairs. You know, you get them drawing, you get them talking to each other, you get them on their feet. And I think that's a really other important part of this workshop is keeping everyone moving and engaged. And if you can get your mentor or whoever you're working with to come and be with you during this session and have other people there to answer questions and have students ask each other questions, it's going to be a really productive and engaging time. Another great thing is, I'm not sure if any of you have heard of the Right Question Institute. I love this resource. I'm going to put it in the chat room. They are all about civic engagement of anybody through the process of identifying questions that should be asked or can be. And the question process is really neat. Let me see if I can spell this right. Institute. I'm not very good at multitasking. If you look at that, if you Google them and go to their resource, they have a thing called the question formulation technique. And I think it's so fascinating because the question asking is something we all take for granted. And I think as we get older and more comfortable with our surroundings, we're not as shy to ask questions. But question asking is really important in any process. And having the students present their idea and having the other students, if there's other teams or other people in the room, ask questions helps them in this process to make steady improvements to their plans and designs. So you'll find that that can get sometimes heated. You know, sometimes students will say, well, I don't think this is so great. Can you tell me why I should use it? And they're already at these really kind of intense points of communication with each other. So you're going to need to help them facilitate that conversation a little bit and say, okay, does anyone have a design question? Does anybody have a question about the user? You know, so helping guide that conversation and their own question asking of each other is really useful. So to give you an example, this was so great last weekend. We had a team who presented their idea for the seagull solution. And one of the other students in the room said, well, how are you going to, what kind of sound would scare a seagull? You know, so they were already asking questions that would help them, that these students could actually use in order to make improvements to their idea? And they said, oh, great question. You know, like they were all very collegiate with each other and they were all very respectful. So encouraging that kind of respectful conversation is really great. And then after, reflect. I think this is always really important too. I sat and I asked the students, well, what was hard about all this? And usually a lot of them will say, well, it was hard coming to a decision with each other because they all have radical different ideas sometimes or whatnot. Or some other things that they find difficult could be, well, how do I draw this image that represents my problem? How do I find out who my problem affects? So the act of asking questions and reflecting will actually lead you really gently into the next part of the curriculum where they're doing some market evaluation. Like, does an idea like mine already exist? How can I help people who are not already helped by this problem? So it's all very kind of great conversation starter, and it helps students think about market research after that. It helps them think about their own process. So what was hard about all that for them, you know? And then you can also ask, well, what did you guys like about that? And you might find that some students identify early on as the marketer of the team. You might find that students start self-selecting roles for themselves. Some might say, well, I want to work on the technology side of things. And others might say, well, I want to help organize the ideas. So we talked in the introduction and the training about the potential breakdown of team roles, and it would be really good to look back at those at this point. Do any of you have questions about any of this? I know it's a lot of information, but we also have, I think you're all in the Coach Google group already, but here's the link again in case. This is a really excellent place for you guys to say what worked well, you know, what you have questions on. We're going to be doing more webinars like this as the curriculum continues between now and April. And I would also love to hear your ideas on where you guys think you could use a little extra support. So anyways, I would like to remind you if you want to access any of those materials, they're all available in the materials control panel part. And just I'd love to hear any of your ideas of where you guys are at with your teams right now and what you guys think you might need help with. Any response? When did you guys start working with your teams? Are you guys all pretty much at the very beginning of working with your teams? You can just write in the chat room if you like, or you can talk because you all have mics that are functioning at the moment, I think. So I hear from someone we started last week. Another person says we met for the first time this afternoon. A girl asked if her father could be a mentor. We have an excellent coach who is following the curriculum. Great. I'm really glad that you guys joined today because this is a really important part of the process, and some teams may need a little bit longer than others to solidify their ideas. And if you don't get started on the right foot, if the problem seems too daunting to students, then what we're trying to do here is to break those problems down and make this more manageable for them. So it's going to take some coaching from you guys and conversation. I think the coolest thing about this curriculum is the conversation that can be had about the types of problems they want to be solving. So, yes. Are there any other resources you guys can think of that you really need that you would be interested in having along the way? If so, I would love to hear in the forum. I check that on a regular basis, and I really, when I first heard that people were having problems with students jumping into solutions before problems, I really felt the need to talk about this with you guys. Yes, we will be offering other webinars. Right now, these are tentative. We don't have exact dates for them, but we will be sharing soon once we determine who we can get. They will all be about 60 minutes long, and we're trying to get people who are kind of big shots in their industries, people that we know that you would love to listen to and hear from, who are in the fields of business, communications, marketing and design. And then finally, we'll probably have one at the end towards the middle of April when people are starting to get all their deliverables in order. Just so we want to make sure that people know where to submit these and how the process works and things like that. So yeah, the areas that I've identified that I think would be interesting and helpful are marketing and design, business, and then the pitching, so communications. If you guys have any other ideas, please definitely share them in the coach forum if you don't have ideas yet, because I'm sure that things will occur to you as time goes on. And we want to make sure that you guys are supported. So I think with that, I will possibly end this. Unless I see any other questions in the next minute or so, I'm really happy that you guys joined, and I hope that the materials I provided here will help you. All right, then. Thank you, coaches and mentors who joined. It's always a pleasure having you here. Bye.